So I usually talk about topics about art on this channel, but today it's gonna be one of those videos where I'm testing the waters, you can say. I'm going to be reviewing the very controversial and most thirst-trappy of all the Star Wars shows so far, The Acolyte. Quick shoutouts to Manny Jacinto for pulling up for the Asian male community. I mean, look at all these comments under this video. Now let me just get this out of the way. While I am a Star Wars fan, I'm not like a mega fan who knows all the lore, right? So while I've played a good number of Star Wars games, watched all the main movies, watched most of the TV shows, I only know the core rules of the Star Wars universe and some fun facts. I'm not lost in the sauce, so you can call me a Star Wars enjoyer in that sense. Very brief background about the show before we get into it. The Acolyte is a Star Wars spin-off show directed by Leslie Headland and it cost about $180 million to make. It tells the story of a pair of twins with a dark past caught in the middle of a tug-of-war between the Jedi and the Sith ? But that's how I interpreted the story. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, in a similar fashion to my artist Patreon review series, I'm going to rate the show based off of these factors out of 5 stars. What I'm not going to be doing though is talking about the drama. There's already been a lot of discussion about it, you don't need another channel talking about it, and I have my own opinions about it, but I'm going to be rating the show purely as a product with as little bias as possible. Starting off with the cast and the acting, I'm gonna omit the child actors here because I think it would be a little unfair for them considering that this is probably their first roles. There's really not much I can say besides maybe they could have had better direction from whoever was coaching them. As far as acting goes, I think Lee Jung-jae, Manny Jacinto, and Carrie Ann Moss carried a lot of the acting. You guys might know Lee Jung-jae from Squid Game. He's an overall phenomenal actor in my opinion, who even dedicated a lot of time in learning English just to prepare for this role. That's a dedication to his craft right over there, and seeing his performance, his decades of experience in acting is there, and his skill is something I can absolutely respect. I know there's a number of people out there mocking his accent, and I just want to say that that's a very shallow and infantile thing to criticize. On the other side, Manny Jacinto has over a decade of experience, starting his career back in 2013. You might recognize him from the show The Good Place, and he's also starred in Supernatural, which was surprising when I read that. And his acting in The Acolyte I would consider to be pretty good in my opinion. Wow, he's also a civil engineer, hey? As for Carrie Ann Moss, I honestly don't think I need to introduce her. She's very well known for her role as Trinity from the Matrix series and is an accomplished actress herself. While we didn't get to see much of her character and Dara in the show, what brief scenes she had just exuded aura. Special mentions to the actors Dean Charles Chapman, Jodie Turner-Smith, and Daphne Keane as well. I think they did a pretty good job as well. Especially with Mother Anastasia, I don't think we can deny that Jodie did a pretty good job portraying the character. The rest of the cast though, and that's a pretty good number of them, they fall kind of flat, especially with Amanda Stenberg with the 2 roles she was given as the main protag / focus of the show. You would think that her decade of experience would be apparent, but throughout most of the show we didn't see a lot of facial expressions. Mother Coral too, for a lot of her scenes her delivery was just kind of stale in my opinion. I mean, this extra conveyed more emotions than Mother Coral did.
They want to take our children!
I don't know, maybe she felt like she deserved the role and it's her channeling those emotions. Obviously, I'm just joking by the way. Overall though, I would rate the cast and acting 3 stars. Moving on to the costumes. Personally speaking, I thought the costumes were alright. I don't have too much of a gripe with them, they seem to be appropriate for the time. I guess the only issue I really have with the costumes was the Smilo Ren helmet. It's a little campy in my opinion, it looks very similar to the Legion killer in Dead by Daylight. Like if you compared Kimir's helmet to that of, let's say, Darth Vader and Nihilus's mask, you'd probably go, what the f***? Like, where's the effort? Show us something intimidating. But the props though, I am absolutely livid with the props. When I say we were robbed of the props, I literally mean we were robbed. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but before I show you what we could have gotten, I want you to take a look at the lightsabers we got from the show, alright? So here are some of the lightsabers from the show. Take a good long look, really burn it into your memory, pause if you need to. Now compare that to what we could have gotten. The only reason I found out about this is because of this Twitter post from Jake Lowe showing concept art from the artist Adam Byrne who worked on the show. Words cannot express how absolutely devastated and livid I am with how they fumbled the ball in the design department. When I think High Republic era, right, I'm thinking of what is the equivalent of the golden age of the Jedi. If it's the golden age, I would expect very lavish designs, especially from the Jedi Order, whom I assume have quite the status, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you see the vision here, yes? A Sith lightsaber that looks similar to a spine? I don't know, maybe Kimir would have had a plus 100 bonus to his intimidation check if his lightsaber looked like this and what could have been Endar's lightsaber. This is such an absolute shame. I mean, imagine this, it would have been cool if May went around offing the Jedi one by one and collecting these elegant lightsabers like trophies. Where is the $180 million? 1 out of 5 stars for this section. Moving on to the world/environment. I personally thought that it was kinda meh. Like, Coruscant didn't really look as impressive as it did in the prequel trilogy, which is sad, and the Brentok fortress and the interior of the ships felt kinda stale. The nature though I thought was pretty good, but I felt like they could have worked some CGI magic to add at least a little bit more wildlife and alien foliage in the open field, for example. I thought the flying jellyfish things were kinda cute though, I really liked them. They did, however, do something very sneaky with the ruins in the last episode though. And I'm not a set designer or anything, but bear with me here. So in art, there's this thing where artists usually, unless it's the focal point, don't draw everything in extreme detail unless they're going for hyper-realism. And the reasoning behind that is because the human brain is pretty good at filling in the details. At least that's the theory behind it. For example, let's take this Ross Jaws piece. He doesn't draw every single strand of hair, but because of the context and a tiny bit of detailing, it registers to the human eye as hair. Now with that being said, these rocks look like they were just spray painted over. I'm guessing they were trying to go for like the moss on stone look, but it's very much lacking in the texture department. Like, come on dude, I'm sure there are different ways to go about making fake moss look realistic by using different materials. I don't know, this is just something funny that I noticed, and personally it took me out of the immersion a little bit. For this section, I give it 2 stars. $180 million where? Now for the music, 1 star. The chant is cringe as f. Next, the choreography. I personally thought the choreography, I personally thought it was alright. If I remember correctly, there was talk about the producers and director wanting to have fight scenes that could rival the prequels and the sequels, which is very ambitious, but it wasn't really quite there. Like, don't get me wrong, I thought the fight scenes were pretty cool, but they weren't that great. I mean, come on, you can't tell me that this doesn't look dope. Well, I guess the cool factor does kind of drop a little bit if you unmute it. The way the music rises to give it a heroic aura just takes me out of it. There's just way too much marvelization there. Quick shoutouts to Jackie for, you know, standing toe to toe with Kimir. She nearly had that fight. Also, bashing your head towards a weapon is extremely risky. Like, I get it, your helmet is made of a material that can short out lightsabers, but what if your opponent decided to move their lightsaber a tiny bit to the left at the last second? Now I know that there are people out there who slow down every single fight scene and nitpick, but I'm personally not like that. If I see a fight scene and I think it's dope, that's it. I can also really appreciate the Matrix, wire fu, kung fu, wuxia elements in the show. I'm a simple person and I personally thought the fight scenes were alright. Overall, I would give the choreography, there's that fucking word again, choreography wise, 4 stars. It's easily the best part of the show. Moving on to the characters, I think in terms of the lineup, I wasn't really invested in a lot of the characters. No one really stood out. Like, I guess the characters I liked if I had to pick were probably Sol, Kimir, and Jackie, who shot up in character rankings after I saw her fight. And despite having very little scenes with her, I thought Endara was also pretty cool. The biggest glaring problem for me is that we don't really get to see much character development for the most part of the story. Like, for example, Sol from episodes 1 to 8, he's way too emotionally charged for a Jedi who, as far as I understand, are supposed to be apt in keeping themselves in check. He's consistently being driven by his emotions and we don't really see that much change about him. With Kimir, I feel like the only character development I saw with him anyway was him going from a bumbling rat to suddenly becoming a thirst trap who wants an apprentice, also becoming a bit of a badass. Jackie though, I was pleasantly surprised with her going from this relatively meek and quiet type to this suddenly violent force, pretty much standing toe to toe against Kimir, which was pretty good to see. She has that dog in her, as they say. For me anyway, the most polished character of the series was probably Mother Anicia, despite her flaws. We clearly understand her intentions and motives, which is putting the twins' needs at the forefront of her own. On a side note though, as much as I loathe the chant, there was a huge missed opportunity to explore the witches' culture a little bit more. Like, sure, they've got their primitive weapons, their own way of wielding the force, but given that we were introduced to the Bunta tree, which is something I assume is abundant on Brendok, and this is just a personal opinion, okay? I feel like the writers could have woven the Bunta tree into the witches' culture more. Like they're using primitive weapons, wouldn't they want to dip them in poison? Wouldn't you want something that produces poison like the Bunta tree close at hand? And why weren't there any of those trees in the fortress? I don't know, maybe they could have also used the leaves for the ascension. Overall though, I think the show would have benefited much more if they dedicated more time to focusing on their major characters to help us understand their motives a little bit more. At least that's my opinion anyway. And to that end, I will give the cast of characters 2 stars. And finally, the plot. Admittedly, it wasn't what I was expecting. I was anticipating a show fully dedicated to showing the dark side, and what we got instead was a story of these twins with a dark past stuck in the middle of what seems to be a tug of war between the Jedi and the Sith. I think that's the best I can describe it. And I don't know if this is a hot take, but whatever. I think the plot idea itself is not bad per se. It's kind of mid, but it was definitely a swerve from what people were expecting. The execution of the idea, however, didn't quite stick the landing. The order the episodes were released in was definitely odd, and there's this Reddit post that reorders the show, and chronologically it makes much more sense to me, in my personal opinion anyway. I feel like they should have released it in this sequence. The show also falls flat on its face with its pacing. I mean, roughly 30 minutes per episode wasn't enough to fully polish and dedicate time to characters, and that's including the major ones. Like, the most polished characters in my honest opinion was Anicia and Soul, and even they were a little rough around the edges. And in that essence, in terms of plot, there were frequent character choices that I just could not get behind. Like in the first episode, within the first 10 minutes of the show, a Jedi Master dies to a mere newbie. As someone who just understands the core rules of the Star Wars universe, it doesn't make sense. Even more so egregious, however, was the fact that there was way too much sexualization happening in the show. Look, earlier in the video I said thank you to Manny Jacinto for pulling up for the Asian men, but that was more to him as a person and not to the show. What I don't appreciate is the amount of sexual innuendo being inserted into the Star Wars universe, and it shouldn't be the type of thing that Star Wars shows. It's not what I know Star Wars for, and for the acolyte showing bodies that don't serve the plot other than to just show them, it's not it plot-wise. I give it 2 stars. As for the final verdict, is Star Wars The Acolyte really worth watching? For me, this is more of a turn your brain off and enjoy the fanfic type of situation. I would even go as far to say that this may have been better off executed in the Star Wars Vision series, and personally the most enjoyable parts of the show were the fight scenes. Overall though, I would give the show not more than 2 stars. Anyway, that's it for the video. If you want to check out some art related content, you can check out my channel, and before you go, here's what state I imagine the Star Wars franchise and fandom is in. Anyway, see ya.
Father, is it over?
At long last. No king rules forever, my son.
I see. Only darkness.